Well, thank you, Ruth Ann, and thank you for this. This blew me away this morning, you guys. I mean, I walked in and I said, you know, Ruth Ann, I really could use a podium today. And she said, I already have one. And I looked, and here it was. And I looked over there, and I was thinking, you know, maybe this, or maybe like a music podium or something like that. And here, this is here. Thank you. It's really, really nice. Very, very nice. I was just very surprised, humbled, actually. So I told you last time I was here that I was closing in on 70. I made it. Yeah, thanks. And you know, I told my kids, I said, you know, I noticed recently I've been feeling a little winded, you know, pushing the mower around in my yard, my push mower, Florida heat, you know, about a third of an acre. But then I started to think, you know, I did the research. I have, in the 70 years of my existence, I have traveled 40,880,000,000 miles around the sun. So I figured, okay, that makes sense now why I'm a little winded doing the mowing on my yard. So Ruth Ann sent me this last week a video, or 2 weeks ago, I don't know, a video of her dad doing this teaching on we need to roar louder than the roar of the devil. Did you guys see that video?
Oh, yeah.
Shagayanath, that's what he was saying. Okay, so I saw this video. And he was doing it in a short sleeve shirt with flower imprint on it. And I said to Ruth Ann, I said, I thought your dad liked to preach in a tie. She said, no, he never liked to preach in a tie. So it gave me the courage to wear this yellow shirt, but I'm still going to wear the tie. I haven't gotten rid of the tie yet. And he said in that video that we need to learn something when we come to church. I don't know if you remember that right at the beginning of the video. And she also told me that he passed away 2 years ago on August the 10th. So I wanted to put together a message today that we would learn something, that it would give an opportunity for me to honor this man, because he was a big part of what I'm about to tell you, and make it personal. So I want to go into a little bit of the background about me, and I'm going to start in 1975. I was in a group called Truth. Did anybody ever hear of a group called? You did? Oh my goodness, Truth, yeah. We had 2 trombones, 3 trumpets, rhythm section, 6 singers. We had a combination of a sound man, bus driver, and we toured the United States for 3 years. I did, and during that time, the first year, we did 455 concerts in 13 months. That averaged out to be 8 concerts a week. We didn't have a whole lot of time off. And during that time, I met my wife, and we were married a week ago, 46 years ago, on August the 13th, 1977. That was our anniversary. Well, thank you. Hold that. So we were married, and it was on the 13th. We were married in Santa Ana, California. Her name was Jolene Ortiz. That was her maiden name. She was Mexican-American. So we got married in Santa Ana, California. My dad loaned me his Galaxy 500 to drive across the country to go back to Iowa, which is where I was from, to have a reception there. And on the way, we stopped in a place in Colorado called, I forget the name of the place again. It's in Colorado. Anyways, Grand Junction. So we stop in Grand Junction on the 16th of August, and we turn on the television, and every channel's got Elvis Presley movies on it. And we found out later that Elvis had died that day. So my wife always, from that point on, was confused as to whether or not our anniversary was on the 13th or the 16th of August. And we went through that. Okay, so while we were in Truth, Jolene became pregnant and miscarried, and that was kind of tough. But we realized that we had been in 3 years, and it was difficult for her. It was starting to wear on me, to be honest with you. So we were looking to see what God had in mind for us and what the next step was. And so a gentleman by the name of Richard Roberts at Oral Roberts University contacted us and said, would you be willing? He really wanted Jolene, because Jolene was the headliner, and I'm not joking with you. You could go online today, you could go to YouTube videos and key in Jolene Vander Maten, and you'll see her sing Rise Again. And she had one of those voices that would bang off the back of the wall. And every time we went in and we sang that song, there were people that would come to the concerts to hear her sing that song. And so he called us and asked us if she would be interested in joining the World Action Singers. And then I said, well, can I do that too? And he said, yeah, you can do it too. And so we both went to Oral Roberts University, and I was in the master's degree in business administration. She was in the computer program. But while we were in Truth, she started to have headaches. And didn't really know what was causing them, but she thought maybe it was just a problem with her neck, and she would crack her neck, and I would crack her neck like a dummy. You know, I should have never done that, but we didn't know any better, and thank God he protected us from anything serious. So when we went to Oral Roberts University, she became pregnant again, and during that time, she really was having bad headaches. And I would come home many times. I had 2 part-time jobs, was a World Action Singer, full-time student, master's degree in business administration. And would come back many times home, and she would be laying on the bed holding the back of her head, right here, and in really extreme pain. But the doctor would not even allow her to take an aspirin because she was expecting, and she just had to endure them. So Deidre was born September the 18th, 1979. And after that, we did a full court press to find out what the problem was on these headaches. So she went to a dentist first. The dentist thought, well, must have wisdom teeth impacted. So he pulled all her wisdom teeth out. Didn't help. Then she started to realize that she had blurred vision and a ringing in her ears. So she went to an ophthalmologist. He looked in the eye, saw that the optic nerve was swollen, generally means pressure on the brain. Sent her to a neurologist, took CAT scan, found out that she had a brain tumor a bit larger than a golf ball with a cyst around it right here on the base of her brain. And then things moved fast. 2 days later, she was in surgery, and so the doctor after surgery said, I'm sorry, Mr. Vander Maten, it was not benign, it was malignant. I went in as far as I dared, but I didn't get it all. I hope I didn't go in too far. We'll have to see what she has left when she wakes up. Now, I'm at Oral Roberts University, you guys, okay? So I had seen miracles. Now, when I was in Truth, I was introduced to the Lord and how, as many different personalities as God has created, he created another way of worshiping him. And he taught me about him. And then I'm at Oral Roberts University, and I saw miracles. We were in partners meetings, and being a part of the World Action Singers, we would have an opportunity to go out with Dr. Roberts, Oral Roberts, and Richard, and they would pray. And we would sing first, he would preach, and then he would send us out as singers to be a point of contact to the people out in the audience. So when he prayed, he would ask, does anybody have an eye problem? Does anybody have a hearing problem? Does anybody have a walking problem? Different things. And whenever he would mention that, people would raise their hand, and we would go to that person. We would lay our hands on them. They would lay their hands on themselves discreetly, and we would pray. And I remember a man. I went up to the balcony in one setting, and there was a man born blind. He had never seen in his life. And I had and when we stopped praying, when we ended the prayer, you don't forget the look on the man's face when he could see for the first time in his life. Can you imagine? He's just like that. I remember another time, I think it was a 16-year-old young lady who had never walked. And I had the opportunity to have her hand on my arm and helping her take her first steps. She got out of that wheelchair. We were in the Maybe Center many times and doing these services. And we okay? Okay. And we would do these services, and I saw wheelchairs empty by the dozens wheeled out of Maybe Center in these meetings. So first I was introduced to the Lord, and as many ways as God created personalities, there's another way of worshiping him. And then he began to teach me about his healing power and about his greatness. And he showed it to me in other people. And so, I'm thinking, wow, they're going to open Jolene up, and they probably won't even find a tumor in there, and everybody's going to be incredibly surprised. Or they'll open her up and it'll be benign, and they'll just simply take it out, and she'll be fine, and it'll be a great testimony. And instead, sorry, Mr. Vander Maten, it was not benign, it was malignant. I went in as far as I dared, and I couldn't get it all. I hope I didn't go in too far. We'll have to see what she has left when she wakes up. Now it's my family. Now it's my issue. Now it's personal. So there was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Tenney who did the surgery. And I remember after he told me that, I shook. I shook for about I shook for about a half hour. And Jolene's mom and dad were in the waiting room with me, and I told them, and her mom collapsed, and it was just a mess. And so I shook for a half hour, and at the end of the half hour, I remember gathering myself, and I said, Lord, in your word, you said you have not because you ask not. And I'm going to ask. And I'm going to ask everybody I know to ask. You're going to be filled with asks. You're going to have Jolene at your throne room more than you can imagine. So many people going to ask. And then I remember physically, verbally saying to the devil, you're going to be sorry you ever touched my family. Shagayanoth. And I didn't even know what I was doing. I was roaring louder than the roar of the devil. Amen. So, we got past that, and Jolene was in intensive care and went down to the intensive care unit. The doctor asked me to come down. And he said, I asked him what the situation was, what the prognosis was, and he said, well, it's difficult to say because she's relatively young, but I would say, and the tumor is not wildly malignant. Just any medical people here? It was a malignant astrocytoma grade 3 on a grading scale of 4. He did a suboccipital craniotomy for a brain tumor. And every time I go in, when we went in, every time we would go into a doctor, when we would move and we would talk to them about an astrocytoma, I had one doctor say, you must be mistaken. Because nobody survives an astrocytoma, that's my understanding. You must be mistaken. So I had the documents with me, okay? We're getting into this, and I handed it to him. And then they would read it, and they would go like that. So the doctor said in the intensive care area, he said, hard to say, but I would say she's got 9 months to a year to live. And I said, well, would you consider it a miracle that she would be okay? And he said, well, I don't know what you mean by a miracle, but I would say it's a miracle that she survived the operation that I did on her. And I said, well, I appreciate that, but would you say that if she came away from this with no neurological deficit and she would be able to function normally, would that be able to be explained? And he thought for a minute and he said, well, I think I could explain it. And I said, well, we'll see. Now, Jolene, she told me later, she's laying there in intensive care, and she's in a lot of pain. And the doctor told me that she was in a lot of pain, and he said, don't worry about it. She'll be in a coma for the next few days, and she won't remember anything. Well, she remembered it all. And she was in a lot of pain, and she said, Lord, if you'll just take away the pain, I'll be able to sleep. Would you do that? And when she did, she told me that she felt a hand on the back of her neck right here, and she said it was hot. She described it as it's like somebody holding a hand warmer. And it was hot right here. And the pain was soaking out of her body into that hand and out. And she thought there was nurses in the room that were really smart. So she was going to try to turn as best she could to say thank you. There wasn't anybody in the room. It must have been the hand of the Lord.
Hallelujah. Amen.
And so she fell asleep, and the doctor, as he said, she was supposed to be in a coma for a few days, and instead of that, in a couple of days, she was sitting up and watching TV in the intensive care unit. Now, it was an initial touch, but it was a gradual healing. And it was something that God was teaching me personally about his healing power. Now, about a couple of Sundays after that, and Ruth Ann, if you happen to have the itinerary of your father, I don't know if you do or not, but if you go back into 1979, December 16th, I believe that's the date that you will find that your father was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, preaching a message in a Methodist church, and he was wearing a tie. And he preached a message called, God is a Big God. Did you guys hear this message already? Okay, so he used this passage. And I'm up in the balcony, and I'm facing an impossible situation. An impossible situation. I mean, I can't do anything about a brain tumor. And I don't have any money. I mean, I don't have any money. I didn't have enough money to buy a stick of gum. I had to take my wife's 1/4 carat diamond off of her wedding band and sell it. A guy in Tulsa, I guess he felt sorry for me, and he offered me $250 for this diamond, and he replaced it with a cubic zirconia of a carat for $50. So I had a net gain of $200, and that's what we lived on for a while. And I'm in this service in Tulsa, Oklahoma, listening to a man with an Irish accent that I'd never heard of before, preaching, God is a big God. And he said, we're going to compare, God has a problem. He's trying to tell us how big he is, but he has no basis of comparison. He had no basis of comparison, however he would say it. No basis of comparison. I can remember him saying this, And he said, first he compared himself to a giant among giants. And then he would compare himself to all the corporate powers of all the nations of the earth. And then he would compare himself to the praise and worship that we can offer. And at the end, and he used this passage, and you've seen it. So you've experienced it. Let me turn this on. There we go. So at the end, Dr. Hale said, number one, I don't know how big God is, because we have no basis of comparison. Our intellect, I remember him saying this, our intellect falls down. It can't comprehend it. Number two, God is a big God. Number three, you remember what he said? He's big enough. That's how he ended it. And listen, I didn't know how much I needed that message. And I took $3 of my $200, and every dollar was important. And I went and bought that cassette. And I listened to that cassette, and I listened to that cassette, and I listened to that cassette, because it got in my spirit. And I wrote notes, didn't I, Ruth Ann? I wrote notes on that message. I gave her a copy of the notes to prove that I wrote notes on the message, to build up my faith, to help us through a very difficult time. I was introduced to God. I then learned about God's healing power through other people. And then, when it was time for me to need it, I could go back and I could see what God had done in others' lives. And then I had a guy come to a church, Irish accent, never heard the guy before in my life, preached this message that made a huge impact on my life. And I lived on that message for quite some time. So I want to take you, well, let me back up a minute. I had no money. Now I had $200, but I'm spending this, And I guess some people in Tulsa heard about our situation, and they gave Richard Roberts $1,000 in cash to give to me, and said, with a stipulation, remember now, this is December 1979. I'm supposed to be taking finals for a master's degree in business program. I'm taking finals, 2 part-time jobs, no time for anything else. And I got a wife supposedly dying, a 2.5-month-old baby at home. I've lived this. Okay? And here this Richard comes in with $1,000 in cash. And he says, the only way I can give you this money is that these people who gave me this money said you can't spend it on medical bills. You can only use it to have a good holiday season with your family and take care of the food items that you need for the family members that are coming in, her family and brother and etc. So here in this low point, in this mess of a situation, a mess, there's this anticipation of something that God's up to here in our lives. Something that God is up to. And Jolene could move her extremities. The doctors were encouraged by that. And eventually she would come home later on in December. And so we didn't know what God was up to, but we knew he was up to something. So I get this $1,000, and I'm able to spend it just to have a good season with my family. And Roger Breland, who is the head of this group called Truth, found out about it. And he told me later, in every concert they did, he would say to the people, remember Jolene, she stood over here and he stood over here, and they were singing in the group, and she's got this issue going on, and I want you to pray for them. Every concert. And we would receive encouraging calls. As I said, Jolene was kind of a headliner. So we would receive, she made an impact on the Christian music field in that day. We would receive calls from names that if I said the names, you would recognize the names in the music industry. In our little ORU graduate housing apartment, telling us how they were praying for Jolene and how they cared and how they appreciated her ministry. We had medical insurance. I didn't know that because we were an Oral Roberts University singers, so we automatically had medical insurance. And the medical insurance that we had under Oral Roberts University said that she had one of the 11 dreaded diseases, which kicked it into major medical. So it covered most of the bills. But there was still like $5,000 or $6,000 in bills out there that were not covered. And I was getting, this was March, April 1980, I'm starting to get these bills from the hospital and from the doctor. First they're white, then they're yellow, then they're pink, then they're green, all kinds of colors, telling you better pay this bill. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. So I'm seeing this, and Richard Roberts, and he came over one time and he said, what do you need in order to cover these bills? I said, probably around $6,000. I don't have that money. I don't know where I'm going to get it. And I'm just like, so about 3 days later, he walks in with a check for $6,000. And in the check, in the upper left-hand corner of this check, the name of the foundation was Eye of the Needle. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And he handed me this check. And he said, I can only give this to you. Sorry. I can only give this to you under one condition, that you are never to know the people that gave you this money. It's been 40 years, and look, it still does this to me. And so I'm able to pay these bills off of you guys. So don't talk to me about the church negatively. The church was there for me when I really needed it.
Amen.
And there was this guy who didn't even know it, an Irish preacher, preaching this message that I just happened to be in that particular church on that particular day, up in the balcony hearing that particular preacher preach that particular message. Just happened to be. Now, I want to fast forward here. I never met Dr. Hale after that message. But in 1993, I happened to move to Florida, to Central Florida. And I happened to hear about this Irish preacher who is wanting to launch a church in the Tarpon Springs area. And I never had a chance to say thank you. And I had just moved. And so I wanted to try to find him and say thank you. And I'm thinking, okay, if I can tell him what happened, maybe it would be an encouragement to the people who are starting this church. So I found the place, I found the time, and I heard such and such a time, and I found this place. And they were already in, I thought I had arrived early, but maybe I didn't, but they had already started the meeting. Jamie, you were there. So I slip in the back, and I'm sitting in the chair waiting for a good time, and Dr. Hale is there, and he's telling everybody what the game plan is, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And as I remember, I may be wrong, 10 or 15 people, I would say, there, and they were in kind of a circle, right? And he was talking about it, and he looked up, he saw me, and he said, "Can I help you, brother?" And so I told him the story, and I told him I was hoping that it would be an encouragement to the people, and he was, Dr. Hale, he's so gracious, and he said, "Yes, it's very, very encouraging, thank you so much." And I said, "Now I'm just going to leave the same way I mysteriously came in." And I walked out, and everybody chuckled. I don't know if you remember that or not. Everybody chuckled. That was the last time I saw Dr. Hale. But I just wanted to say thank you, and God gave me the opportunity to do that.
Praise God.
I learned about him, about God. I was taught about his healing power through other people. And then God, made it personal for me in my life, where I was, where my need was. So I want to take you to Luke chapter 5, see if I can do that. We're going to go up to the Galilee. This is where we were the last time I was here. We were talking about the demoniac. This time we're going to talk about a miracle that happened on the lake up in the Galilee. This is the Sea of Galilee. This is what it looks like. Those of you who are going to go with us are going to see this. The lake is about 8 miles wide, about 13 miles long. It's 160 feet deep at its deepest point. There's 18 different species of fish that live in that lake, 10 of which are commercial, and we're going to focus on one. It's the musht fish, or the tilapia fish. Those of you who are going to Israel, you're going to have an opportunity to eat that fish, that type of fish. Okay, you can eat it with heads or without. You have a choice. And if you don't want fish, you can have pizza. All right, but this is the lake. In the background, you see Arbel, beautiful lake, and this is the top of it. So we're going to look at a miracle that took place on that lake for Peter, and it was designed for Peter. And when I look at the scriptures, it looks to me like Peter had 3 different callings, at least 3. In John chapter 1, he had his first calling, and it tells us that they were down in the area where Jesus was being baptized. And at the time, Andrew was down there, and they were looking for Messiah, and they found him, and Andrew came running to his brother Peter, and he said, "We found the Messiah, we found the Messiah." So Andrew takes Peter and brings him over to Yeshua, to Jesus. And the Lord said to him, "You are Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas," which translated means Peter. This was his first introduction to the Lord. But he kept on fishing. He was introduced to the Lord, but he kept on fishing. The next time, it looks like, was in Matthew chapter 4, verse 18 through 22. And this looks like Peter's second calling. And it states, "Now as Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, 'Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men.' And immediately they left their nets and followed him." So they were using a cast net in this case. And the word went to Peter, saying, "Follow me, I'll make you fishers of men." And they left their nets and followed him. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, did the same, left the boat, left the father, followed him. But it looks like they went back to fishing. So then the third calling comes along, and it's in Luke chapter 4. The Lord had just performed a miracle in the synagogue, and when you're there in Jerusalem, or excuse me, in Tiberias, in the Galilee, I should say, you will be in the synagogue where that happened. And he left the synagogue, went to Simon's house, and now he's making it more personal yet. He goes to Simon's house, the Lord did. He heals Simon's mother-in-law of a high fever, and then they have this all-night prayer meeting in this house where the Lord is casting out demons and healing people, and it's going on all night in Simon's house. Very, very personal. But he goes back to fishing again. So then, it's this kind of a boat. They found this in the mud. 2,000-year-old boat. And they had to go through a lot of restoration to keep the wood from crumbling to dust because it's 2,000 years old, it's in the mud. So they did, and they now have this type of a boat on display at Nofginosar in the Galilee. But in Luke chapter 5, it tells us about this miracle. Now, we need to set the stage here because there's at least 3 different types of way to fish for the fish in the Galilee. You can do a cast net, like Peter was doing before. You can do a drag net. You've heard of that one in the Word of God. Or you can also do a net that you have to drop, that you have to lower into the lake. And it's in sections. It's a large net. They work in pairs. You have one boat that's out there dropping this net into the water. You have the other boat that is whacking the water to drive fish into the net. Now, in the day, the net was made of linen. Now they use filament. So filament is transparent. You can't see it in the water. So they can actually use it during the day. But back in the day, they made the nets out of linen, which the fish could clearly see in the water during the day. So the only time they could use this net would be at night. All right? You have to understand that in order to understand what was going on here. It was called a trammel net. Sections. They would tie these sections together. They would lower the net, and they had to go in the deep water because that type of fish, that St. Peter's tilapia fish, was in the deep water. So they'd have to go into the deep water, they'd let down the nets, the other boat would slap the water, drive the fish into the net, and they would do this like 10 or 15 times during the course of a night. Okay? And also, it's good to know how these guys were paid. Any of you on commission-only basis? These guys were commission-only basis. If they didn't catch any fish, nobody got paid. 40% went to the owner of the boat, and I'm getting all of this information, by the way, from this little book called The Sea of Galilee and Its Fishermen in the New Testament by Mendel Nunn. Okay? 40% went to the owner of the boat. 60% was divided between the captain of the boat. He got 2 shares. A share and a half went to his assistant, and the other shares went to the people who were lowering the net and pulling it back up. But if you didn't catch any fish, you didn't get paid. And then the next morning, when they brought the net back into the shoreline, they would have to clean the net and dry the net. Okay? Now you understand? Luke 5. It happened while the crowd was pressing around him. He listened to the word of God, and he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. He saw 2 boats lying at the edge of the lake, but the fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. Trammel net. In the morning, daylight, they had fished. And this is what, I took this picture out of this book again. Fishermen cleaning and drying their trammel nets. This is what they did back in the 1930s. They were still doing it. But again, now they're making it transparent. They're the filament, okay? So, Luke chapter 5, verse 3. He gets into the boat, which was Simon's boat, which means he's still fishing, and asked him to put out a little way from land, and he sat down and began to teach the people from the boat. And I get it. I mean, come on, you got to pay the bills, right? So he's out there and he's fishing still. So when he had finished speaking, the Lord said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." What type of net? Trammel net. Deep water. Tilapia. Problem? The fish can see the net. This is not going to work. Don't you understand? We worked hard all night and caught nothing. And you're wanting me to go back to these guys who haven't been paid and tell them to take these nets and put them back in the boat so they can go out into the lake when no fish is ever going to swim into this net, so they can take the nets back out of the boat and re-clean them again and dry them again. You're asking me to do that? Master, we've worked all night and caught nothing. But in my mind's eye, the Lord had been introduced to Simon. Then he was able to see miracles and hear the preaching that this man was able to do. So he was very, very well acquainted with him. And then he got even closer when the Lord had shown the power in his mother-in-law, and he showed his power in his home. And in my mind's eye, I'm thinking, Lord, we've worked all night and have caught nothing. I lock. Looking into this man who had been doing all these miracles. All of a sudden he looks and he sees I lock. And in my mind's eye, I'm thinking the Lord is looking at Peter and he's saying, didn't say a thing, just trust me. Trust me. But I will do as you say. Like he stops in mid-sentence. I'll do as you say, and I'll let down those nets. And when they did this, they enclosed a great quantity of fish. Peter looks out over the side of the boat. The guys in the other boat didn't even have a chance to start whacking the water yet, and he's seeing the water churning alive with fish, fighting to get into a net that they can clearly see. One of those fish stories that you hear about. And they're dragging this net up, and the sections of the net are ripping apart because of the weight of the fish that are climbing and clamoring to get into a net that they can see in the middle of the day. And the other boat, they signaled to their partners in the other boat for them to come and help them, and they came and they filled both boats with fish. So they began to sink. And now, in my mind's eye, they're dragging these fish into the boat. The boat is full of fish in the middle of the day, and it's sinking, and Peter is stunned, and he looks, and now he's got another eye lock with the Lord. And he knows, Peter knows, that he knows, the Lord knows everything about him. He's looking right into his soul. And this man, who is controlling the fish, he can tell fish what to do, and they do it. This man now knows everything about Peter. And Peter knows he knows everything about Peter. And Peter knows that he's dealing with something that is beyond him. Beyond him. He's dealing with deity. And he looks at this man, and in my mind, another eye lock, and he said, "Go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man." And now he looks at the Lord again, and now he sees forgiveness and he sees compassion. For amazement had seized him and all his companions because of the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, the other guys that we talked about in the other passage of Scripture. Remember them, James and John? Who were partners with Simon. And Jesus, compassion, forgiveness, do not fear. From now on, you'll be catching men. And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. Now, as far as I know, he never went back to fishing again. He was all in. They had to go fish to find that one fish with a coin in its mouth so they could pay the taxes. They had to do that. And then after the resurrection, he was out fishing again. And then, of course, the Lord was making breakfast for them on the shoreline, and he brought him back in and he explained what was going to happen to him. But at that point, he was all in. He knew. He was introduced to the Lord. He was then saw the miracles of what the Lord was capable of doing, and then he saw it in his own life. Just like me. And just like you. This is a very dark time in my life, and God brought me out of it, my family out of it. And then, about a year ago, I get a call from a mutual friend of ours, Laura Leah Media. Right, Ruth Ann? Say yes. So they, yeah, she thumbs up. And she said to me, you know, there's a church in Tarpon Springs that's interested in doing a trip to Israel, and her pastor, Ruth Ann Hale, has talked to me about it. You might want to give her a call. And I said, Ruth Ann Hale, Tarpon Springs, is that any relationship to this Dr. Leslie Hale? She said, it's her daughter, his daughter. And then she told me, that Dr. Hale had passed about a year prior to that. So I looked up the number online of the tabernacle. I called it. Your pastor, Pastor Hale, answered the phone. So I talked to her about the trip, and I talked to her about the past that I had with her dad and all of those things. And I said, what time is your service? And I said, would you mind if I come? I just wanted to see, what had happened, because I didn't know. The last thing I knew was the meeting that you guys had. So I came out here a couple of times and was so impressed, with what God has done here in this place. Jolene, my wife, lived almost 40 years after the doctor said she'd have 9 months to a year to live. She passed about 4 years ago. June the 24th, 2019. And she was able to have 2 more children when the doctor said she wouldn't be able to have any more children. And now I have 11 grandchildren. And I feel confident that the devil is sorry he ever touched my family. And I know that there are people here that could say the same. And so I so appreciate the opportunity. Here I am in a place with a brand new podium, speaking in a church in the middle of a vision that a man had years later on how he helped me. And here I am. I have an opportunity now to speak to people who were discipled under his ministry and to help lead a group to Israel and to work with his daughter in making that happen. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. Right. JR, it's a full circle. So I get this call from this mutual friend, and here I am, you know. And so I'm sure, and Ruth Ann, you can come up if you'd like. If you wanted to, I don't know if you wanted to close, however you wanted to close. I am sure that if Simon Peter was here today, or Dr. Hale was here, me, Ruth Ann, many of you, we would be able to say again, number one, I don't know how big God is. We have no basis of comparison. It boggles our mind. Our intellect falls down. It can't comprehend. Number two, God's a big God. I know that. Number three, He's big enough. He's big enough. Amen.